the task decorator. Actually, behind the scenes, they have to be subclasses of task, but I have found that this function approach is easier to understand. And task decorator only wraps them in the task superclass. And to run them, we use the fab command. It looks for a fab_file.py in the current directory or in parent directories, and runs the task hello. So very simple. By taking advantage of SSH, it can run on multiple hosts. So you can define a task, and using the run function, you can run arbitrary commands on the other servers. And you can specify the hosts very easily. Here, there's a command line flag. And I can run it in my machine and remote machine. It runs them sequentially. Sometimes configuration is more involved. You need like different users, or things are located differently in different servers. So we have the environment dictionary, where you can store task configuration information and where you can share state between tasks. With this in mind, you can write tasks that only do configuration. So the development tasks configures the environment to use only development servers, and the production task configures the environment to use a production server. And if you run regular tasks after the configuration tasks, they run on the environment configured by the first task. So you can do very involved configuration very easily in a simple Python function. We use Fabric for two things on my company. One is for general scripting tasks, because it's easier than just plain Python. And the other is for remote interaction. For regular scripting tasks, an interesting case study we have is we had a problem with a client that wanted to send gift cards to their customers, but the sending failed because these gift cards were huge PDF files that they couldn't email on time, and will probably be above the sending limit. So they asked us to upload them to the server and provide users with a download link. And of course, this download link should be at a random URL, because we didn't want users to just muck around with the URL and get someone else's gift card. We took advantage of Fabric through environment configuration. It was very easy to run the task as a specific user in the server, and we could easily configure globally where the final gift card PDFs will be located. And we could, just by changing m.hosts, I could run it locally on a development server, so I was sure that it was doing the right thing before running it in production. Without having to mucking around with command line options that are prone to error. Secondly, it is just Python, so we can leverage existing Python batteries like logging, which Python provides really nifty logging facilities, and it's easy to just mix them in our script. Or CSV, the Python CSV module is very easy to use. CVS, sorry, it's very easy to use, and yeah, you can leverage readily in your administration scripts. And it let us mix Python with system calls. So it is very easy to be writing your regular data processing script and just in the middle of it doing system calls. Of course, this is not too difficult to do in pure Python. So where Fabric really shines is when you're interacting with remote hosts through SSH. One interesting case of this is the Vagrant machine. Vagrant is this tool for running like virtual machines inside the machine to do your development in the virtual machine and to replicate the environment in your server. But they are sometimes cumbersome to interact with because you have to run the commands inside the virtual machine. And through Fabric, this is much more seamless because it provides really good SSH integration. So you can use key files very easily. You don't need to specify a password. And that makes authentication much more simple and faster. So if you want to run a common task, like all the time when I'm developing Django, I need to sync DB and then to run south migrations. You can run them in just one step. And you can run them inside the Vagrant environment just by using that simple command. So it makes interaction much more seamless. If you want to run just arbitrary commands, like a one-off thing, you can just you separate with the double dash, and you can run any command on the host configured for Fabric. So there, I'm running them inside of the virtual machine, and it's very, very easy. It's very easy to compose tasks, too, because they are just simple Python functions. So here for resetting the DB, when I just want to bring everything down and back up, what I have to do is I have to drop down the database and create it again and run syncdb and migrateDB. And since I already have a task written for that, I can just call it normally like any other Python function. So I just run it, and it takes care of inter-process calling the different tasks. And this can be even more sophisticated. You can have tasks that are like class-based, and you can do like task inheritance. You can use, if you have a very extensive library of scripts, you can organize them using Python modules. So it is just Python, and that's very convenient. And it is so easy and so convenient that you can just do silly stuff. Like when I run tests, I like the feedback of having a colored output, like something red if something went wrong, and green if it's everything okay. So Fabric provides a convenience function for outputting colors to the terminal and checking the status, the return status of a process. So it is very simple, just go out with it. Now, Fabric is sort of low level, and there are lots of alternatives for it. If you are doing server configuration, like configuring users and setting something up from scratch, you are probably better off using something like Ansible for when you are more clear about what you want to do instead of how you want to do it. When you only need the build tool part of it, when you're just running local scripts, there's a new tool called Invoke that is based on Fabric and a little bit on Rake, Ruby's Rake. It's still in beta, but it is quite cool and useful, and it's sort of like an evolution of Fabric for the just local environment case. You should check it out. And I think that will be all. Do you have any questions?
So, how do you test your Fabric scripts?
They are just Python, so in principle you can use just unit test. I use mock for monkey patching the system calls. I'm not sure if there is something more convenient.
Okay, there should be some kind of system informations like some host name and roles. Where do you store them?
Like passwords?
No, just hosts and roles. Where do you store them?
Host name?
Yeah.
Sometimes if it's something really small, I just write it in the FAT file. You can also use configuration files like an RC file. You can keep that out of version control and just specify the host list there. And you can, of course, do something more sophisticated, like using environment variables, because you can just use the standard library for that.
If was pair my deploy, it can pass over I rollback these stops. So it can depend some conditional script.
Yeah, so tasks are run sequentially, so it is easy to execute future steps based on the result of previous tasks. Yes. And also when some task fails, like outside of your control, when the non-catch exception, it just holds the whole thing down, so it doesn't blindly continue.
Yes, I did. I was just going to ask, is it difficult to port this to Python 3? I know it's one of the few projects still left on the wall to move.
I'm wondering the same thing. I don't see anything that is particularly difficult, but I think the project is not as active as it used to be, so maybe that's the reason. Perhaps we could work on that on the sprints on Monday.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I don't know, maybe because of Invoke, this new tool that it's kind of its spiritual successor, but I find that I really use the SSH features, so I think it's a shame if Fabric is going to be abandoned.
Anything that Invoke does that Fabric doesn't do?
I'm not sure. I have only seen cursorily, but
I think Invoke's only local, right?
yeah.
So like you can't actually replace Fabric with Invoke. Okay. Fabric's too supposed to be like no problems.
Actually, we had a question.
It looks like, so for simple tasks, for scripts, Fabric looks good. For I don't know, complex server configuration looks like Ansible or Chef is a good one. When do you think I should move from Fabric to Chef or Ansible, or what a key indicator to I should move on?
I think that more than complexity, or more than a complexity difference, it's more of a use case difference. I, as a general rule, use Fabric for anything that I would have used Shell, because Python is much nicer than any Shell script language. But when I'm doing strictly configuration, like not something actionable, but just I just want the server to look a certain way, that's when I turn to tools like Puppet or Ansible. Even when we are using Vagrant, we have like half of the script is Puppet scripts and half of it is Fab helpers. It sometimes gets messy, but yeah, I think that's the line. Like if you are doing only configuration, you turn to a configuration tool, and if you are doing more like processing, I tend to use more Fabric.
My question is similar than the previous questions. I also plan to use some configuration tools such as Fabric. Have you ever compared with the other configuration tools such as Chef? So what do you think about the advantage of the Fabric compared with those utilities?
Perhaps the advantage of Fabric is that, at least when I started using it, there was Chef and there was Puppet, and they were both like special languages. Chef, I think it uses Ruby, and Puppet uses a custom language. And it was just easier for me to use Python because I have known it for a while. Nowadays, perhaps the Fabric is much less involved. You just install it and you can really use it. Whereas Puppet or Chef or any other big configuration tools tend to use much more setup.